In a dramatic turn in Middle Eastern geopolitics, the United Nations Security Council has voted in favor of lifting sanctions on Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, paving the way for his upcoming visit to the White House. The move comes less than a year after Sharaa led a sweeping rebel offensive that ousted longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad in December 2024, finally ending Syria's 13-year civil war. The resolution, introduced by the United States and supported by several key European and Arab members, marks a symbolic and practical milestone in Syria's slow reintegration into the international community. Washington's ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, hailed the resolution as a strong political signal, emphasizing that the world was acknowledging a new era for Syria, one that has moved beyond the authoritarianism and brutality of the Assad years. He told the Security Council that while Syria's past cannot be erased, its future must not be held hostage to it. President Sharah has taken measurable steps toward peace and reconciliation, Waltz said, and the world must respond with incentives, not isolation. The resolution passed with 13 votes in favor and 2 abstentions, notably from Russia and China, reflecting cautious optimism but also lingering doubts. Sharah's rise to power has been one of the most unexpected twists in recent Middle Eastern history. A former deputy foreign minister under Assad, Ahmed al-Sharah, defected from the regime in 2012 after denouncing Assad's crackdown on peaceful protesters. Over the next decade, he became a leading figure within the armed opposition. His eventual leadership of HTS, a group once affiliated with al-Qaeda, made him a controversial figure internationally. Yet after HTS formally severed ties with al-Qaeda in 2016 and began presenting itself as a Syrian nationalist movement rather than an Islamist one, Sharah gradually repositioned himself as a pragmatic rebel leader. By 2023, his forces had consolidated power in Syria's northwestern regions, controlling key cities like Idlib and parts of Aleppo. When Assad's military began collapsing under internal defections and external pressure in late 2024, Sharah led a final coordinated offensive, supported indirectly by Türkiye and tacitly tolerated by Western powers. By December, Assad fled Damascus, and Sharah's forces entered the capital with promises of reconciliation and reconstruction. Within days, the Syrian National Council declared him transitional president, a move swiftly recognized by Türkiye, Qatar, and eventually the United States. Still, Sharah's record remains complicated. As the head of HTS, he had once been under UN and U.S. sanctions for alleged links to terrorism and for human rights violations committed during the war. However, over the past year, Washington has quietly shifted its position. In July, the United States officially removed HTS from its list of foreign terrorist organizations, citing its organizational restructuring and substantial policy shifts under Sharah's leadership. European governments followed suit in the months that followed. The new UN resolution now formalizes that global thaw, removing travel bans, asset freezes, and trade restrictions that had hampered Syria's reconstruction efforts. In Damascus, news of the lifted sanctions sparked cautious celebrations. Syria's foreign minister, Faisal al-Mikdad, posted on social media, "Syria expresses its appreciation to the United States and to friendly nations for their support of Syria and its people." State media portrayed the development as a triumph of diplomacy over division, while Syrian citizens interviewed by international media described a mix of relief and skepticism. "We want peace," said a shopkeeper in Homs, "but we have seen so many promises before. We will believe in change only when we see it in our streets." The White House visit next week will be Sharah's first official trip outside the Middle East since taking office. U.S. President Donald Trump, whose foreign policy legacy has often been defined by unpredictability, praised Sharah as a tough guy with a strong past, adding that he's made good progress towards stabilizing Syria. The two men last met in May during Trump's trip to Riyadh. where they discussed counter-terrorism cooperation and post-war reconstruction. Since then, Washington has begun exploring limited economic aid and infrastructure investment in Syria, contingent on human rights improvements and power-sharing arrangements with the Kurdish administration in the northeast. For many observers, the meeting signals an extraordinary diplomatic reversal. Less than a decade ago, U.S. forces were targeting HTS positions in northern Syria. Now, the group's former leader is preparing to walk through the doors of the White House as the president of a post-war Syria. Analysts argue that Washington's motivation is pragmatic. Stabilizing Syria means curbing Iranian and Russian influence, reducing refugee flows to Europe, and preventing a resurgence of ISIS cells in the region. This is less about trust and more about containment, said Dr. Lina Al-Tamimi, a Middle East analyst at Chatham House. If the U.S. can anchor Syria in a framework of reconstruction and gradual normalization, it limits the strategic room for Iran and Russia to maneuver. However, not everyone supports this normalization. Critics warn that lifting sanctions too early could whitewash past atrocities and embolden militant groups elsewhere. Human rights organizations have pointed out that HTS under Sharah's command was responsible for harsh governance in Idlib, including arbitrary detentions and executions of rival factions. Amnesty International urged the UN to tie any sanctions relief to measurable accountability mechanisms. The U.S. State Department has responded by stressing that the sanctions removal is temporary and conditional, pending continued progress on political reforms and cooperation with international human rights monitors. Meanwhile, in Syria's war-torn towns, the focus is less on geopolitics and more on survival. The civil war left an estimated 600,000 people dead and displaced more than 13 million, half of the country's pre-war population. Reconstruction is expected to cost over $400 billion. Sharah's government has promised to rebuild infrastructure and reintegrate former combatants through an amnesty program. Early signs suggest that international investors from the Gulf and Europe are interested, particularly in energy and construction sectors. However, Western governments remain cautious, wary of corruption and the dominance of former warlords in the new administration. The broader regional response to the UN decision has been largely positive but cautious. Turkey, which had long supported opposition groups in Syria, welcomed the move, saying it paves the way for stability. Saudi Arabia and Egypt offered muted congratulations, while Iran criticized the decision, accusing the West of rewarding armed insurrection. Russia, though abstaining from the UN vote, reiterated its call for a Syrian-led political solution and warned against external interference. Beijing too expressed reservations, but indicated it would work with the new government to ensure stability and reconstruction. For the United States, the optics of hosting Sharah are as symbolic as they are strategic. In the post-Ukraine geopolitical order, Washington aims to reassert its influence in the Middle East, where Russian and Iranian sway has grown in recent years. By bringing Syria's transitional leader into the diplomatic fold, the U.S. hopes to shape the terms of peace rather than watch others define them. As President Trump prepares to welcome Ahmed al-Sharah to the White House, both leaders face immense expectations. Trump to deliver a rare foreign policy success, and Sharah to prove that a former rebel commander can truly lead a fractured nation toward unity. The coming week could therefore define Syria's next chapter. If the visit results in genuine commitments, humanitarian aid, reconstruction funds, and credible reform pledges, it might mark the start of Syria's long-awaited normalization. But if it remains a photo op without substance, the scars of war will only deepen. After 13 years of devastation, what Syrians need most is not symbolism, but stability. Whether Ahmed al-Sharah can deliver that will soon become clear, not in the grand halls of Washington, but in the streets of Damascus and Aleppo, where the true test of peace begins.